Thank you. Okay, so we're mic'd up and camered up, and let's get started. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the start of budget season, sort of. I guess this is where we dig our teeth into it. We've been going at it for a little while with the schools getting to understand their budget, their preliminary budget, which has been recommended. And now we, of course, get into the town departments. Level service is an additional ask beginning tonight over the next couple of weeks pretty intensively, so we'll move quickly and efficiently. And at the same time, there's been a lot of great policy discussions that Peter has had with the Board of Selectmen, and I think we're all more or less up to speed on the recent stuff, perhaps not the really, really recent stuff, meaning last night's meeting. But the week prior, whatever that date was, 12th or something like that.
22 minus 8.
15.
16.
Somewhere in that range.
15.
Yeah.
15, thank you. Thank you.
We're FinCom. We can do basic math.
Right. That was particularly, germane to where we need to be in terms of level of understanding of the current situation for FY20, even at the early stages in some ways, but with a much better understanding of where we were, earlier in the winter when we just had a lot of placeholders. And obviously a significant budget gap, so we're faced with lots of questions and potential overrides and different scenarios and different funding of different departments and schools, lots of different ways that we'll get into. So for tonight's, I think on the agenda, I think Peter, you were going to maybe lead off with kind of bringing us into the fray and those discussions, and if that's the case, I'll ask you to. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think probably the best jumping off point, recognizing that you've watched the past several selectmen's meetings, but just to bring everybody up to speed, make sure we're on the same page. I'll go through my January 11th memo that is in your packet, which is at a high level kind of the latest update on where the board left off on their big picture policy discussion about the current status of the FY20 budget. So just kind of to walk through that, because I think that would be helpful to kind of get oriented. As FinCom knows, the school, the regional school district budget was submitted, recommended budget by the superintendent in mid-December. That budget since then was nominally adopted on a tentative basis by the school committee in alignment with the regional agreement at their meeting, I think on January 2nd. And while there have been some ongoing discussions and deliberations on the school side with the school committee, nothing substantive has changed relative to that initial recommendation from the superintendent, right? Last year, we know we got to maybe a little beyond this stage in the process on the school side, and then all of a sudden the change in how athletic fees were covered, included or not included in the operating budget came into the equation. Nothing like that yet coming from the schools at this point, school committee. So the net operating expense increase from the difference from 19 to 20 was 6.2%. Drilling down into that number a little bit more, essentially what's being proposed is a level services budget plus an increase of $250,000 total in OPEB contributions and $73,000 for a new school resource officer. So those two figures combined are full 1% of that net operating expense increase. So that then would mean that basically just to deliver level services for the district, they're proposing a 5.2% net operating expense increase. So then take into account the enrollment shift, our assessment is going to increase by 6.9%. So it's just under $700,000 year-over-year change. So where that leaves us relative to the overall budget picture is $934,000 over our levy limit. And just gonna kind of go through what that's comprised of at this point. On the town side, $242,000 of that is to provide level services, and that assumes, the important caveat is that assumes a 3% net operating expense increase for the school district, which is that placeholder that we kept there as we started the budget process and have proceeded along.
And what's the dollar figure associated with the 3%?
It's just about, it's just over $300,000. I don't have that number exactly.
300,000 plus,
Yeah,
okay.
it's like 315.
Right.
so.
On a 10 million roughly.
Yep, thank you.
Then, there's another, of that 242 of level services, there are, $52,000 in, new capital funding in the operating budget that we, paid using one-time funds last year. We have, those obligations continue to be in place. We don't have a choice there. So
Are
those-
they leases?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're lease to own agreements.
Right.
Yeah, there's three of them. And then, there's also non-discretionary MS4 stormwater compliance. If you remember, that was funded. This is year one that we're in now. We had thought year one was gonna be FY18. So we had budgeted for it, had an appropriation from town meeting. It ended up getting pushed back a year after town meeting had approved those funds. So then we encumbered them from 18 to 19, so we didn't have to pay for them for 19. So we had already had $45,000 appropriated from 18. But for 20, we budgeted $50,000 to make sure that we're in compliance with that. And we'll have a discussion around that compliance as part of the DPW presentation. There's, you know, and we'll get into a little more detail later, but there are a number of proposed changes to personnel that we covered in the department head, the day-long session that we had on the beginning of January with the various department heads. But one of those is a request for additional staffing on DPW. The flip side part of that conversation is loose leaf pickup and the amount of manpower that takes, and the implications in terms of a direct impact on the extent to which we have to sub out the collection and sampling work to comply with the new stormwater regulations.
Catch basin cleanouts.
Correct, which is dry, and outfalls.
And outfalls.
Which is driving that $50,000 number up. So more to come on that. But
Okay.
that, right now, we've assumed we're continuing with loose leaf pickup, and and we're gonna sub out about $50,000 worth of work for FY20 to Weston and Sampson, or the engineering firm, to do those, to do all that work, to stay in compliance. So that's what's included in that $242,000 level service number. Additionally, there are about $190,000 of what I'll call discretionary increases. So these are all items that, again, are in the budget right now, that have been proposed by the department heads and vetted.
New hires,
to a certain
raises,
extent.
new hires, raises.
So it's compensation
so-
adjustments, new staffing, and a handful of expense increases that are, you know, we think
Yep.
are important and merit consideration. And then there's $187,000 in new capital funding requests. So, you know, if you remember the past few years, we've had free cash available to fund capital. That's how we've done it. For FY20, our free cash at the end of 18, so available now to be used to subsidize the budget and use for capital was down just under $1 million. So we were at close to 1.4, a couple years ago, down to 1.2. The trend has been down as we pushed up on the local receipts and
Mhm.
cranked down on expenses everywhere else to try to get a levy limit budget. So that's been the net effect. That's what we've been projecting. That's where we are. Right now, we still, as you know, are using $700,000 of free cash on the revenue side to try to come in with a balanced budget. And so we have just over $250,000 available. The board's policy is to maintain a minimum of $250,000 so that our starting position for next year is at least decent. And so that's why the capital funding requests that are new are in the operating budget at this point. But again, all adding up to the extent that we are almost $1 million over the levy limit, which means functionally at this point, we have no ability to fund any of this new capital. We don't have
Right.
free cash, we don't have the capacity.
So in the past, with free cash, before we started using it for capital and other expenses, it went to reduce the tax rate. Is that correct?
Yes, so that's the historical precedent,
And
and that's what
how-
we've continued to do.
Right.
We never had free cash levels as high as we did over the past couple of years historically. So we were more in the ballpark of $600,000-$800,000 of free cash. And so some portion of that went to, keep the tax rate
Mhm.
down, and the rest of it was just kept in reserve.
And so what happens to free, I mean, we use free cash, we have a high demand for free cash. But if you don't use the free cash, where does it go?
Falls out to the following year, which is why we maintain a balance of $250,000. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that by statute or is that by guidance by the board, the selectmen? I mean,
No, that's by statute.
MMA.
Just-
Yeah, that's,
yeah.
that's.
so we can't dip below 250?
Oh, I'm
Town
sorry,
policy.
the 250
Reserve.
is a town policy.
Yeah, that's a town policy.
Okay,
Correct.
okay.
But we've been using it to subsidize the tax rate meaningfully for the past 5 years anyway,
Well, right.
right?
So,
And pay for a little bit of capital more recently as we
Yes.
had the higher free cash balances.
and I think, yeah,
We
so
simply
the
can't do that
history
this year.
is that back up until
I'm not
about,
sure I understand.
I'm not sure I understand it.
Last night we had
I'll try to
Waze,
explain it.
we had Waze giving directions last night, right?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah. Siri, Alexa.
Yeah, I know, seriously.
Don't say it out loud.
I didn't say the H-E-Y.
So what we actually did was we used free cash to reduce the tax rate. But up until about 4 years ago, it was just doing that. It was just reducing the tax rate. But then, starting about 3 years ago, we became reliant on it to balance the budget.
Right.
And so that's where we got into a position where we really were in a structural deficit.
Important point of clarification, right, right,
Mhm.
right.
So, yeah,
Right.
a little different
Very-
nuance.
very-
where we
very-
hit that-
very
we
important.
hit that crossover point.
Yes, where we couldn't have done it without the free cash.
Couldn't balance the budget without the free
Yep,
cash.
yep.
Where before, we were just trying to mitigate that tax rate.
Right, and this year, we can't even do that with
Right.
free cash.
Correct.
Right.
Which,
We
as-
kind of saw coming anyway.
we did.
Yep,
Not a surprise.
not a surprise, yeah.
So that's on the town side in terms of staffing and expense and personnel. On the school district, basically, the two major costs that are included in that over levy limit number of $934,000. A little over 200,000 of that is the difference between 3% net operating expense increase and the representation of level services, which is
Mhm.
at 5.2%. Generally, every percentage point is about $100,000 on our assessment. I mean, just back of the envelope kind of math. And then the balance of $116,000 is for Wenham's share of above level services. So our share 36% of OPEB and the new school resource officer. So as this committee knows, after talking with the board on January 8th, there was an interest in understanding how we could provide a level services budget on the town side within our levy limit, our Article 1 budget. If we did that and fully funded those level services on the town side, what we would have capacity to fund in terms of our assessment. And so backing into that number, basically what we could accommodate within the budget is a $159,000 increase in our assessment. So that's a 1.4% net operating expense increase for the schools. And as we've always kind of called it out separately, $177,000 for the enrollment shift. So total assessment increase of $336,000 is what we can fit into that levy limit budget and still provide level services on the town side without a town operating override for level services.
Do you have a limit in terms of town override? I mean, what's that upper limit? So you just said roughly 300K. Could I make it 400, 500?
I'm still not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so you repeat what you just said.
Basically, we can provide a level services budget
Yep.
on the town side.
Yep.
And in doing so, in order to come in under our levy limit, all that we can afford to accommodate on the school side is a $336,000 increase in our assessment.
What's the levy limit?
The total levy limit?
Yeah, before you need to go to an override. So right now, you just said, if I kept it under the levy limit, I didn't need to do a town override, correct?
No, so this would preclude needing to do a town override. This would set it up so that there would just be a school
There's
operating.
an override either way,
Oh,
basically.
all right, okay, then I
So,
misinterpreted.
so it's just I think Peter's making the distinction between if we have what we'll refer to a lot
Yeah.
as, in these discussions, as a town level services. And that means that, so in his memo where he's saying $617,000 for the town, but if you were to back out the additional 188 and 187, right?
Yep,
That's our town level services. Of course, we still can't pay within our levy limit the school assessment.
you're,
So that would isolate the need for the override, if you will, to just the school piece only. Is that
Basically,
accurate?
what we'd be saying is, the town can provide level services with an Article 1 budget. And the schools, just like
Would
last year.
get a chunk like last year, same Article
It would
1.
be a different chunk and.
And smaller percentage-wise,
A little
yep.
smaller percentage-wise,
Yep.
but essentially we'd be doing the same thing procedurally that we did last year. We would provide level services on the town side, and we would tell the schools, this is how much we can accommodate within our budget, and the rest is gonna be a school operating override. It's a little different number, a little different percentage,
Right,
but functionally, it's the same approach that we took
Okay.
last year.
thank you.
And I guess the only other point that I think is important to bring up in terms of the FY20 assessment on the school side is that our net assessment is going up by a little under $700,000, but our excluded debt obligations are dropping by $200,000.
That's the
So
school, right?
yeah, so if that was still there, our total assessment would be increasing by almost $900,000.
Mhm.
So again, to summarize, last year was 331 override,
Override, yeah.
Yeah.
and this year we're looking at, for the school, of 559.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's the bottom line number for where we are at this point in the budget process. And again, that assumes we're funding no new capital on the town side, and we're also not funding any new staffing or compensation or expense increases on the town side.
Mhm.
And so then my caveat is what we've already touched on in the memo, which means, yeah,
Nothing.
we're kicking the can on the structural deficit. We're not addressing our capital needs,
Correct.
which are, on the order of about $200,000 a year in new capital needs.
Mhm.
So if we don't spend $200,000 this year, we're probably gonna be looking at a $400,000 need generally.
Mhm.
the following year.
And is it just, I mean, with some capital needs, you can delay it, but you can actually, if you delay it too long, you're increasing the total cost. So are you just saying it's additive, or it's,
Just saying it's additive.
Okay.
I'm not accounting for any escalation
Okay.
year over year in
Okay.
cost. They're relatively, it's generally equipment, or, you know, things like the COA roof or the COA rug. I don't think there's
Right.
gonna be major
Okay.
construction escalation costs. If we had a significant capital project, then that would be an entirely different story.
okay.
Just that the need is going to continue to be
Mhm.
there and,
Like if you don't fix a roof, if you fix it, it might cost $100,000. If you don't fix it, you may end up having to pay $300,000.
yeah, and I.
Speaking from experience.
Sure, and there certainly is, you know, I think it's worth getting into some detail on both the capital items and the personnel and expense items.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of the close of the memo is to say, this is how much we can accommodate at this stage in the process, assuming we don't fund any of those needs on the town side. We could opt to support, including some funding for those elements in our operating budget, and the net impact would obviously be a decrease in what we could afford in terms of paying for the assessment. So it would be a reduction in that number. But we could still do that and not have a town operating override hypothetically.
Hypothetically, yeah.
And so in terms of bond ratings, if we don't address like structural deficit and some of these other things, they will decline?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect the next time we go to issue debt, whenever that is, that regardless of, you know, unless this year we're talking about debt exclusions and/or operating overrides to permanently increase our levy limit and get out from the position that we're in now, I would expect we're gonna have a downgrade in our bond rating.
And so the regional school district bond rating is separate from ours, is that correct? Or they can linked at all since we provide the funding?
Separate issuers, right? I mean, they're not,
Like our bond rating wouldn't affect the district bond rating, is that correct?
I'd have to check.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's not urgent, I was just
bond rating
curious.
is-
It might to the extent that the bond rating agencies might look at the schools and say, you have a municipality, they may have trouble servicing that debt.
Right,
Their own
that's why
debt
I'm
or
wondering if they're
yours,
connected at
yeah.
all. Yeah,
if either
Yeah.
one were massive, you would think it would influence the other's
Yep.
ability to pay obligations. Makes-
Our current bond rating is triple
yes,
A.
yeah.
Have we given a heads up or discussed with the department heads, maybe, you know, this is part of it, what's everyone has a capital need, what can they live a year without? Like, have we ever tried to trim it down? And I'll just use a roof, for example. We know there's a lifespan that ends, but just say, no, we need a new roof next year, or I think we can wait a year? Have
Yeah,
we-
so we, on the roof in particular, that
I was
was
just
some
gonna
of the
example,
feedback
it's
from
cars, it could be other stuff.
Yeah, so that was one of the questions that the board had, and I went back to the facilities
Yeah.
manager and to the COA director and got some more information on that, and I would say that that issue is not an emergency, but is certainly an imminent need, where it could very well be the case that if you think about the timing of the budget cycle, if we do nothing on that this year, we're talking about, you know,
21,
what's that?
RFT.
21.
We're talking about
Yeah.
18 months from now, having funding to deal with it, and in the meantime, yeah, we could start getting leaks and water damage and so forth.
Well, that was part of the question, I guess you could say. To answer that question, whether it's a vehicle for the police or fire or raises or all this we have to contemplate, but I didn't know if there's we can get another 2 years out of this is imminent, that sort of thing. So if they took that year and a half into effect and said, no, this vehicle's gonna, bottom out in a year. Has that kind of timetable been approached yet, or?
So what we had initially had conversations with the board about was having them do some prioritization around those items. And I'll share out, I've heard back from a couple of members of the board,
Yeah.
and I'll share out kind of the aggregated feedback that I've gotten from them. A little hard with just a couple people to aggregate.
Yeah.
A little easier with, you know, this
Massive
larger
committee.
number. That's right. But I think that would be helpful for the finance committee to do, and that table is another item that's in the packet.
Yeah, I actually put it in your envelopes before. It's not on your list, but it's in the envelope.
Yes,
I
thank
think we
you.
have-
That's a two-pager.
That was in the
Um,
front.
And I
Yep.
think as we work through the budget process, my recommendation would be that if we could get feedback kind of collectively from the BOS and FinCom on, you know, kind of your input, and then also do the same on our end with the department heads and say, you know, certainly not trying to pit one department against the other, but for each of the department requests, there are in some cases, multiple requests for a particular department, you know, which of these is the most pressing if you had to pick one?
Right.
And kind of have that conversation.
Right.
So that then we can see how those align and see how we kind of, you know, go through the you know, where we end up on the budget process in another couple of weeks.
I think that's difficult in a way, just thinking out loud, because we have maintenance of the town, right, and we have public safety issues with the capital, so, you know, none of these are looking, it's funny, very costly on their own, it's just the roll-up, so, and like,
Right.
and Iron Rail, for instance, is a revenue source for the town. So I think we have, I'm not anticipating a lot from there, I was just wondering if we approach them.
We have them with, I mean, they certainly understand the current status of the budget, where we are relative to the levy limit, and what big picture we're talking about. But haven't asked them to go back and
But-
give their own priority.
And it's still early to do that. Like they've already delivered forth to Peter their ask,
Yep.
as they were asked to do for above level services. So, but I mean, I think we might get there where to Peter's point, he could help facilitate an intra-departmental prioritization if there were multiple asks within
Yeah.
one. As you mentioned, David, on their own, in isolation, none of them really seem, you know, they're all well justified, well explained, rationalized, all that stuff, and none are egregious, at least on the surface. As we get into this and learn more, that's our opportunity to ask questions, bearing in mind the context of the entire situation and the fact that we'll be partnering with BOS to help inform collectively these financial decisions that will include and exclude some of these asks, basically, at the end of the day.
Is this assuming, excuse me, is this assuming that the capital is all debt exclusion funding?
No, this assumes that it's funded in the operating budget right
This,
now.
oh, this is in the
Those-
operating.
Those are currently included in the
So-
operating budget, but not, essentially, they're not funded anywhere.
So there would be potentially different alternatives of funding if you did a debt exclusion on these items, for example.
Yeah, so the issue there is, I think there probably is only one new capital item that would rise to the level of issuing a debt exclusion, and I don't think we're gonna do a debt
Right.
exclusion for a backhoe.
Okay.
Right, I think generally
But-
debt
but com-
exclusions for capital, you're looking for some significant, you know,
Significant amount of money.
$1 million plus, all that stuff.
yeah, I mean, as we
Cost
learned
of-
with the Iron Rail project on the order of $250,000 for new roof and paving, basically what our First Southwest, our financial advisors, came back to us with after town meeting is they said, for something on that level, you're just gonna be issuing bans for 10 years. That's the most cost-effective approach there.
To assume what?
Bond anticipation note, instead of going through a formal debt issuance.
So is there anything that's, you foresee being added to this list, or when we're talking about all this prioritization, this is pretty much it?
Yeah, the one thing that has been discussed, but is very preliminary, is the concept of a shared HR staff position between Manchester and Hamilton. And the cost of that was on the order of $25,000 or so. It would be
To Wenham.
To Wenham, yeah.
As a consultant?
as a shared employee, actually, so a full-time HR director kind of position that would be shared between the three towns. We'd have, I think, for the $25,000, around 15, I think it was 15 hours 10 hours a week of that position. That really was an early conversation, definitely interest on Hamilton's side and with Manchester. But, you know, in the hierarchy of need was something that was a relatively late add. And certainly, I think big picture is something that has been recognized as, you know, needed capacity organizationally.
Do we have HR capacity now, or is it incorporated into your position?
No, it's,
Well said.
you're looking at it. We had an HR audit done a couple of years ago. We got grant funding for it, and they came in and made a host of recommendations, policies, procedures, staffing. They did a fair amount of outreach to the staff at the time, asking, you know, their input on how things were going, what could be better, and they, you know, their top of the list was both the feedback from the staff and from the consultant was, you really should have a dedicated person doing it.
What does the school system use for HR?
They do it in-house
They
with
have their
staff.
own HR director.
I don't know that they have an HR director.
It would be like superintendent.
I think it's through the superintendent's office, the
Yeah.
administration office. I don't believe.
But they have a HR staff?
And we handle generally benefits are down in the finance office.
Right.
And everything else is up with me,
Dispersed responsibilities?
which is not unusual.
Sure.
That's why I think Hamilton and Manchester similarly are dealing with, you know, that kind of dynamic and recognize that it would be beneficial. for us to change
So, it would be would it be beneficial in terms of cost savings down the road, in terms of examining health care and other benefit plans? And being able to have.
Hard to say. I think in terms of reducing the town's overall liability, and certainly you could make a case for
Retention or
all of, yeah.
Yeah.
all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it, yeah.
All that.
Talent acquisition. and-
Retention of the people who have to do the HR now.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so shifting gears a little bit, and while we're talking about being able to accommodate some of these other things, a topic that was discussed at last night's selectmen's meeting, and this was the first time that the concept has really been brought up. And I think I sent a release to Alex when just been bouncing back and forth over the past couple of weeks. It's the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund. So this is something that we can adopt under Chapter 40, Section 5B. And it is intended to be set up, a lot of communities use it to fund capital. But we certainly could, and my proposal would be, if we were gonna take it up, that we'd set it up specifically for student enrollment. That's a cost that we've always kind of called out separately, acknowledged that it's, you know, something that we have to pay, but nobody's fault, just a shared responsibility. And if you look out over the past 5 fiscal years, our assessment for the regional school district has increased by just under $1.4 million, just based on enrollment shift
Is
costs.
that 5 years? How many years? Yeah.
That's trending
It's
down.
it's
so
down for 20.
Presumably, in a couple of years,
We hope
there's
so.
even more relief.
For however long, you don't know.
Right.
'Cause then you tack on new years
So,
that are unknown, but.
yeah, so
So
what's
general demographics
3-year
in the
rolling.
state are down.
yeah, but it's
But it's the
very hard to
split.
project out town to town. I mean, we had the study done by McKibben,
Right.
which we think is better than you know,
NASDAQ.
the NASDAQ in terms of forecasting out. Their projections for this year bore out pretty much right
Yep,
on the
yeah,
number.
Yeah, it's impressive.
So that was impressive. I don't know what it's gonna mean for out on the horizon, but it certainly looks like we're on the backside of that kind of massive shift, which was really just down in Hamilton and up slightly in Wenham.
Yeah, so when you say student enrollment though, do you just mean a delta? Or do you mean, so?
Yeah, so what the delta is, so like from FY 19 to 20, the cost of the enrollment shift is $177,000.
Yeah, I got it, I just didn't,
So, yeah, so just that delta.
okay.
So the idea would be with these special purpose stabilization funds is that you can do an operating override and appropriate funds toward that. But this operating override doesn't permanently increase your levy limit. It's almost like a debt exclusion in that way, and it's also variable year to year. So you can turn it on one year when you need it, and you can back it back down. It basically is whatever you want it to be. So it leaves a lot of discretion to the municipality in terms of what it looks like. But to my way of thinking, let's take, for instance, FY 20, if we went this route and appropriated $177,000, it would be an operating override that would go for that purpose. But we'd be taking that amount of funds out of our Article 1 levy limit budget, which would give us some capacity to fund some of these important services, staffing changes, and capital needs. So, you know, it would basically, if that was the route that we went, we'd be able to fund half of the new staffing service and capital needs that are proposed.
How does it get proposed to the town? Is it school?
So it goes to town meeting,
Yeah.
and it's a
School or
2/3.
Override.
What's that?
I'm sorry, the question, is it a town or a school override?
It's a warrant article.
It's a warrant article. It would be for to create this new special purpose stabilization fund and to approve an operating override and appropriate those funds to that new stabilization fund.
I think of it as a flexible rainy day account that the state has, that you could put this money aside and the community could use it at their discretion, and it wouldn't hit the tax rate.
Well, it does.
We're still paying for it.
Yeah, and
You
it's a
still
very
gotta pay
specific
for it.
purpose.
And that's the
Yeah.
thing, it is for a very specific purpose. It wouldn't be, I think that's the value to it when you're going to town meeting, is saying, these are the costs we've incurred over the past 5 fiscal years. They've taken up at least 50% of our new levy capacity year over year, and have shrunk our ability to provide level services within the levy limit on both the town and the school side. It's nobody's fault, it's costs we've had to incur, but this is the reason why we have an operating override now. Let's try to set up a mechanism to fund this outside of that annual budget process, so that we can absorb those swings without it draining so much on our capacity to, again, provide those level services on for town or the school.
But it still hits the tax rate.
It still hits the tax rate, but again, it's not a permanent increase.
It's
So-
a debt exclusion kind of increase.
Right.
Well,
Is it every year?
Yep.
So every
It
year
Can
the town
vary
has to
every
vote?
year.
No, so my understanding is actually, once it's authorized by town meeting, and we have to double check, again, this is conceptual conversation at this point, but my understanding is it's actually a vote of the Board of Selectmen on what that amount is, once there's an initial authorization, and we'd have to double check that.
But my understanding of that is it can't grow any more than 2.5% in the
Correct.
following year. So say we decided to do 100,000 this year, the selectmen couldn't say, well, we're gonna do $400,000
Right.
next year. They can
Right.
only do the 100,000 plus the 2.5%.
1025.
And it is one of those things that in hindsight, you look back when we
needed it.
Well, when we had that major disbursement of E&D from the
Yes.
school district, and we had some sense that the enrollment shift was coming at that point,
Would have been a great time.
we could have said, here's a chunk of money, not had an operating override for it, but had it there, so that when and if that enrollment shift did hit, we'd have the ability to plug that hole without doing basically what's happened over the past several years.
But you
So,
don't foresee that problem going away over the next couple of years. I mean,
Yeah, that's
it's,
my,
I understand
impossible
what
to
you're doing
predict.
on the stabilization.
Yep.
But it doesn't solve the problem,
It
not for
create,
the next couple of years.
well, no, it creates, it definitely creates additional capacity, and there's,
How does it increase, you're still raising taxes. You're still increasing, and I understand
Yep.
what the fund is for.
Yep.
But you'll still have the same problem the next year and the year after, as you forecast it.
correct.
Right, so it doesn't, quote,
You're
go
basically,
back to solve the problem.
yeah, it doesn't solve the root of the issue, which is
Correct.
the
Yep.
expensive
It's just
assessment.
taking care of the levy
You're
stuff.
front-running
Yeah,
it by a
understand.
year and freeing up additional, I mean, what makes it, I guess, special, I have some thoughts and a couple concerns. What makes it a little bit compelling is the fact that it frees up levy capacity for additional
Mhm.
expenditures on the town side. It does, I mean, to Mike's point, it only kind of brings you forward 1 year, unless you were lucky or smart enough historically to have amassed a meaningful balance that you
Right.
could then apply in the period of pain, the 5-6 years of this enrollment shift, killing us cumulatively well over $1 million, eating away at new growth. It does feel like it has that short-term benefit. Two concerns. One is that, and I know we'll talk more about this, and I think this is early stages that you've just brought it up with the Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen.
and it really is
so-
just to introduce the concepts.
and it's a great idea too. I'm glad that you did so, as the board expressed appreciation of your having done so just last night. But it feels like it does shine a really bright light on just the apportionment itself, just the split.
Yep.
So you've always done a great job, as was also recognized, of breaking out monetarily that split, right? How much of the additional money to the schools in our assessment is just based on the enrollment shift. But I don't think that might highlight it in front of the townspeople, in front of the residents at town meeting. It's rather esoteric to get them to understand what this actually, that even be voting, like what the hell is this for? It's one thing to say, well, it's to cover, additional monies for
Yep.
more Wenham, fewer Hamilton, so on and so forth, which they've probably gotten accustomed to hearing about. But, it places a lot of focus on that piece of it alone, when it's really a level services issue that we're grappling with, a 5.2% on half our budget, and that this wouldn't, of course, solve or address in any way. So I agree, I totally agree, this is a creative way and potentially a really compelling way of looking at it, but in terms of selling it to the town, if it were indeed the right thing to do, I think there are a couple challenges there.
Don't disagree.
well, I think a lot of the stuff that's presented in the warrant might seem esoteric to a lot of town people.
That's
So it's
fair.
our job to
It's
tell
our
the
job to make
story
it
of what
clear.
it all means, after
Yep.
we figure it out ourselves. And also, on the flip side, by articulating the issue clearly about the enrollment shift, you also could get more support for it. Because it's just to give kids a basic education, it's not anything extreme that's being asked for.
It is very black and white. It's just the percentage of the students that are coming from Wenham. And in that respect, it's not, fraught with any kind of, it's not politically charged. It's
Right.
just we're paying our fair share, and we might pay more because we don't know how many of our kids relative to theirs are going to go. So this is a way of, setting money aside to account for the surprise to the upside. In that respect, I think it's straightforward and potentially reasonable.
So also, in this memo, and I also think Jack mentioned it at one of the board meetings recently, using existing funds. But so far tonight, we've just talked about additional funds. And it appears there's no wiggle room with existing funds or reapportioning something or purposing something.
So our existing funds, really, the two things that Jack brought up at that meeting a couple weeks ago now were CPA.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
the ability to use CPA for any capital needs. We went through the 5-year capital plan, and there's the only potentially eligible project is Pingree Park tennis courts.
Yeah,
And
that's the only thing I could think of.
Based on all of the latest information we have relative to school needs and so forth on that, the board in December opted not to put in an application for CPA funds for you know, this year. That may well change next year or the year beyond that, but, you know, we literally sat down and went through the whole list, and that would be the only potential thing.
What's the price tag on those tennis courts?
For 4 brand-new courts, which would be, you know, the 25-year big picture fix, is $300,000.
Yeah, that's about right.
And
Yeah, he
then the
also
other
mentioned
piece was
stabilization fund.
stabilization. So we have 526,000
something
or
like that.
so currently available. And I think my response to Jack that night, and still my response, and I think Patty's too, is that's, you know, those funds are meant for, you know, real mitigating circumstances, emergencies, economic downturns, you know, major circumstances that are beyond the town's control. And we know that we will continue to have a structural deficit, that we will continue to struggle to provide level services, even if a school operating override passes this year, like it did last year. We're gonna be at this table having the same conversation next year. So using those funds for that purpose, I think would not be a good idea, because it doesn't put us in any different position financially, big picture, going into the next year or the year beyond that.
And that could affect our bond rating
Oh,
too.
Yeah.
without question.
That
Yeah.
would absolutely
Without
affect it,
question.
and I think significantly affect it.
Mm.
Because they're looking at what your total available reserves are relative to your operating budget, and certainly stabilization, you know, granted, you know, it's just a $20 million budget, so it's actually, the balance right now isn't that bad, but we haven't put money in that in years, and so for drawing that down in any way would definitely impact the bond rating.
Future growth and levy limit, have we have any projections yet of Wenham Pines or the development near Dot Street of when that would
Yeah,
hit the
so
books?
so new growth for FY20 is projected at $200,000. That's an increase of $100,000 on what it's been the past couple of years on the budget side. Our actuals have been $200,000+ the past 2 fiscal years, and that's been largely independent of Wenham Pines or Spring Hill. Those are the 2 major subdivision projects. And so those definitely will increase capacity, but I think Wenham Pines in particular, but Spring Hill to a certain extent as well, you know, those have to be a little further along in terms of their development to be able to count those dollars in just at a high level, and certainly within you know, specific fiscal years. So yes,
It's a nice way of saying they're not selling.
well, yeah, I mean, they're moving along, their
Wait a second,
construction's
that's nice.
happening, but I just don't think
Right?
that it's certainly for FY20, you know, anything we want to count on. There may be some relief in 21 and 22, and there is, I believe in 22, a pretty good chunk of unexcluded debt that's dropping off, about $100,000 if I remember right. So there's going to be a little new capacity there. On the flip side, just even given where we are on the FY20 budget, that assumes you know, a couple major things. One, we stick with the basic life support fire-based EMS program, and on the order of $150,000, $175,000 in revenues there. We projected, I think, $40,000 for this year, so a pretty significant jump in local receipts just from that program alone. And then also an increase in our cherry sheet revenues for in-state aid, net state aid, because right now we're projecting staying in the rec up in Middleton with the regional dispatch service there. And at this point, State 911 is taking over that program come July 1, and they're fully subsidizing it. So our $82,000 a year that we've been paying off the top of our cherry sheet is dropping off. So that's about almost $200,000 of new revenues that we're projecting for FY20 that gave us more capacity than we would have otherwise, and yet still, you know, where we
Still,
are.
we've got this
Yeah,
big gap,
okay.
yeah, yeah. All right, so let's, yeah, Eric and Diane are patiently waiting, so we'll move forward in the agenda and get to the start of the department head, sort of patiently, yeah.
No, sort of understanding.
Oh, sort of understanding.
Oh.
Well, thank you. So, okay, so let's move ahead, because this is just the start of a lot of discussions that we're gonna have on this, but I thank you again, Peter, and the memo from the 11th was
Yeah, thank you.
excellent. So first up is Eric Mansfield with the Water Department. Thank you, Eric, for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Again, as we have the last few years, it's a level funded. The only difference is on this one is we are, one of our employees, well, the only other employee is looking at retirement in next year. So we did increase the salary line to accommodate a new hire to be hired before he leaves.
It's just a month of transition, is that right?
Yes, we figured in. And no new capital for next, for FY '20. And everything else is about the same as it has been the last few years.
There
So
is
we've
the-
seen a decrease in?
There is the $35,000 capital reserve line
Yeah.
that we set up last year that will then be transferred into the capital reserve fund. So that was year one this year, it's in there again next
And
year.
that'll be for future projects.
Yep.
This is the last year of our water tank debt, and that falls off. That frees up about $75,000.
Was that debt obligation on the general? Was that in, like, paid for from the revolving fund, or no? Was that in the general?
So water's
Budget.
special revenue account, so it's like quasi-enterprise. So the revenues and expenses for water, always offset, exactly. So
That's
it's
right.
self-sustaining.
That's right.
That being said, on the revenue side, we're pretty conservative with our projections. If you look at our actual revenues for water over the past several fiscal years. So there's a current balance, think of it as water's free cash, of just over $200,000.
Yeah, probably up around 250. And then, like this year, we bought the new truck,
Yep.
a new utility truck. We use that money for that, so we're not, no debt on that.
So it's like the retained earnings.
Mm-hmm.
Under the salary and wage, could you explain the merit increase for the water superintendent? Because it looks different than other merit increases. It appears that you have a 1%, a 1.5%, and a 2% for a 4.5% merit increase. Why is that separated out, and how did that come
Those,
about?
well, what you were doing is we were showing you could get 1%, 1.5%, or 2%.
Yep.
The total number at the end is based on a complete 2%, but not adding all three together.
It's not adding all three together. Thank you very much.
That'd be a good
Yeah,
gig,
it looks
right?
like-
Yeah, but no, we're
like a
breaking
pretty
it down
good
to show which, every step, so.
It's like your restaurant receipt,
Yeah.
20% tip is this much, and,
That's, yes.
right?
They're getting a
Yes.
2% tip.
Yeah,
But
but the
yeah,
total number is the highest amount.
And for all of the non-union employees who are eligible for the 2% merit, what
Right.
we budgeted for FY '20 is
It's
that
it's just that it's
maximum.
displayed
Right.
a little bit
It
differently
is.
here.
I think that's probably
Is that
just
unique
a
to water?
Scrivener's error that we can pull out.
Good, just
Yep, good
because
catch.
it's always 2 points.
Nope, it's a good question.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
It'd be nice though. So I don't know if anyone else had any other questions about the budget.
More than water.
Was usage lower this year? We had a wet summer, right? All the grasses were green, because we had plenty of
No,
rain. Not really.
they're pretty consistent. We had some usage that was up because we had a major leak.
You explained that before, right? That was a subdivision, right?
Yes.
So, or newish construction? and-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, so but that wasn't a build-out cost.
You, that's right,
Um,
yeah.
But no, we're pretty consistent, whether it's a wet summer or a dry summer. It doesn't fluctuate a lot.
So last year, we restructured the penalty fees for not complying with the water ban. Do you-
We increased the top rate.
Yeah. do
We
you-
added a tier.
And you guys are the ones that monitor and enforce that? Was there any change at all?
It didn't deter.
Yeah.
Um,
Did it
So we
increase?
brought,
But
we
we
raised more
increased a little
revenues,
bit.
which was not really the point.
Did it increase?
Yeah.
Did it increase? Yeah, that's the
There
other
was
question.
there was an increase in revenue from it, but no, it didn't. But it may take a couple years for some people to realize they're paying extra. But everybody looks at their water bill.
And it was wasn't it like a tiered penalty? Like if you go over by X amount?
Yeah, anything over
It's-
75,000 gallons in a quarter.
But then if you go way over that, it's even a bigger penalty. Was
Well,
it
that's
like
what
an
the biggest
increasing-
penalty is if you use over 75,000 in a quarter.
It's basically double the rate for your usage below
Yeah.
that. So
But
it's
there's 4 tiers to the whole system.
Okay, right.
The base rate of
Got it.
5,000 gallons, and then anything between 5,000 and 15, and then 15 to 25, 25 to 50, and then anything over 75.
75, are there like 30 users?
Yeah, the most around 30 customers out of
In
1,170.
that top tier, there's like 30 out of 1,100 that are in that top tier.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the same 30 that were there before, the top tier system.
I think you already answered this, but just to confirm, so salary and wages also come out of water fees collected?
Yes.
It's completely,
Yep, the whole budget comes from water fees. We use no tax dollars.
thank you.
Other questions? All right.
All right, excellent.
Thanks a lot, Eric.
Yeah.
Now we're being efficient.
Well, sorry.
So wouldn't it be nice
Took
if
us a while
dog
to get to
fees
it.
could pay for my budget? We've collected enough dogs.
Sell more dogs.
Don't introduce
That's
it.
cool, he's all encapsulated.
Penalize no scoopers. Right.
That's a good idea.
Sorry, Dan, where are we in town clerk? Anyone know? Anyone ahead of me?
Oh,
161.
Oh, I don't know where I am in your book.
Thank you.
On a side note, have you ever looked at other towns, what they charge? Are we comparable to
As far as dogs?
dog?
Yeah,
fees?
all of our fees are a little bit lower than most people.
Despite some revisioning a couple of years ago, right? Oh, permits, maybe we looked at
Permitting.
permits.
Yeah,
Change
there.
yeah, we did a fair amount on the permitting side.
What, for multiple dogs? When do you need a permit for a dog?
Oh, non-dog
Permitting
permitting.
fees, like the building building
yes, that I
stuff.
know.
Yeah, no, my
Inspection.
fees
Like-
have not.
Okay.
But, so, my budget is kind of sort of the same, it just wavers based on pretty much the elections and how many elections we have and don't have. The biggest change, I think really the only change I have is, an increase for my administrative assistant to bring her rate within the range of other people in town and outside of town that do her type of job.
We did
That was-
provide backup information that Diane gathered, both for external comps and then where similar administrative positions fall currently on the wage scale, and that backups should all be.
Is that all, they all have that?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that the title budget request rationale?
Yes,
Paragraphs, right, yep. Great.
that's about the $200 cost impact.
What is it, 52?
If, again, just to pay, so number one, it was $7,000 a year for dog sales? Or the dog, cause I just bought one, right? So
Right.
if we doubled it, would that pay for its own? Is that something that we can, instead of $10 a dog, it may $20 a dog, would that help with some of the,
I don't know where the dog revenues money goes.
oh, okay.
Just goes into the general ledger. It doesn't go into anything in my department.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But it would go into the general fund. It would hypothetically increase our levy
Right.
capacity by
How many dogs?
7,000.
X dogs,
$7,000?
yeah, times, yeah.
My dog's
We,
almost
we register, about 600 dogs.
Wow.
of 6,000 again, just, it's not for us, but that's $20 for a dog is really not that big of a deal.
And some people don't like.
Is that one time or
$10.
annual? That's,
It's
What?
every year.
it's every year?
Every year.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah. Have you done any research into what
I
other,
do, I
what
have
other
a-
area
yeah, I
communities
do.
charge?
Mhm.
Are
I
we,
mean, we are well, there are some towns, we're probably right in the middle of our
Okay.
small town
Mm.
type things.
Is this Massachusetts state law? Because where I've lived before, there's never been a,
It is Massachusetts state law. I don't know if
Dog.
it's outside of Massachusetts.
for the, what the maximum fee?
registering
No,
dogs
to
and
register a
charging
dog.
fees for
Registering,
them.
yes.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
mass state law. I don't know if other states have it. I would assume so. I mean, the communities need to know if the dogs are rabies vaccinated and,
Type of dog, or anything,
you know.
just a thought.
So, yeah,
I always, when you come up, I always find a way to give more money, I think, to the town, because I think last year I said maybe the rates for the metal disposal could go up.
right, and that would be DPW. I
So, like,
don't
this
get that
doesn't-
money either. I just sell those kind of things. We could, yeah.
I just, for half, it's
Um,
like $35 for half a ton of metal, which is a lot of metal. Trying to
Well,
help.
raising the dog fees could, what's the increase for the administrative assistant?
5,200? It would, hypothetically,
So,
increasing it from 10 to 20 would, but that assumes that you're not gonna lose people who say, I'm not gonna register my dog.
right, exactly, yeah. I was just wondering how many dogs are not even registered.
Right, I
in the
mean,
first
my
place.
biggest goal is to get the dogs
Well,
registered.
right, so,
Yeah, you
so
want-
Diane's been going in that direction.
trying.
More dogs
I'm doing
registered.
Yeah.
everything I can to get every dog
Yeah.
registered, just
Got it.
because I think it's really important
The
to
right
do.
thing to do.
Be this dog.
And I'm sure there are more than 600 dogs.
Oh, you think there's
Yeah,
more than, I was
I
gonna ask
believe
how
there's
many
probably
dogs
more
aren't
than
registered,
600
do you
dogs in
think?
Oh, what?
How many dogs aren't registered, do you think?
I don't know, I
Oh,
just,
you're just guessing that it's more.
guessing that there's probably more than 600 dogs.
I never thought of that as an option.
Sorry to introduce the concept.
One in every 3 houses? I don't know, someone came in today and registered 5 dogs.
Just a
Wow.
note on the administrative assistant.
Yes, on the administrative assistant.
Let's get back to that.
I'll have to
Just a note on the
think
administrative
of that
assistant
definition
position.
change.
I did note that the administrative assistant at the water department is at, I can't read it, a 2390-something, 95. So it's a, you're,
In that,
appears that you're well within the ballpark, even within our own.
That's, we
Community.
looked at both internal
Well,
and external.
That's the request that I'm
So-
making, yes.
so-
Because
We
she
looked
would
at
have been
that.
at 16.
Correct.
I mean, she is at 16.
She is at 16.
For next year, her salary would be 16.
Right, that's, and that's where, with level services, it would remain at that amount.
A year?
16 an hour.
An hour.
16 an hour, 1587, right?
Just do it now.
1619 up to the COLA. So is that, so the line item that you have on the budget form, Dan, that's
With,
with the 23?
yes.
The 20, there's 2364, and I mean, and then there's 20,
Did I do that?
it's 20, oh, it's 2364, you're right, sorry. I was looking at 2341. That's the average of the communities that have
Yes.
administrative assistants in that office, in the town clerk's office. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, she's very, I can't say enough about it. It really helps the office, helps us get stuff done. We do a lot in that office all the time, very busy. And she's right on top of things.
Very
She can
pleasant.
cover when I'm not there.
That's great.
And obviously, that's been a big push to the board the past couple of fiscal years, is to get to pay equity and market rate,
Mhm.
to make sure that we're retaining folks and paying them what they should be paid for, and that it's in line with internal responsibilities and what's out there, so.
Right. Just curious, is that, so is it a graded position currently? It's not
Because
graded,
it's not,
Because
it's less than 19 hours a week, so the only graded positions are essentially those 19-hour plus
right.
positions.
Yeah, she's only 10 hours a week.
Right.
And would this include an increase in the hours as well, or just the rate?
Nope.
Just the rate.
That's
Got
just
it.
the rate.
Yeah, it's significant that she's the only one with that low of an hourly rate.
And there are, we'll get to it, but there are some folks, the van drivers and the admin assistant at the Council on Aging, who are also well below the, kind of rate structure that the internal and external comps would justify.
And then I do actually even have something on the capital, which I personally think could be put off, because we could just work harder at keeping it. It's for a dehumidifier unit for our vault. The air in there isn't good. There used to be an air conditioning dehumidifier in there. It's not really working this year with a terrible summer we had. It was really difficult and got very muggy, and I bought 2 portable dehumidifiers for the vault, et cetera, et cetera. It was a lot of extra work, but I'd be happy to continue that to save the roof at the COA. Not that it's the same price, though, is it? Well, yeah, probably could.
Half a roof.
Half a roof is better than no
Third
roof.
of a roof.
Third of a roof.
More like a third of a roof.
So that was something I would, from my office, I would be fine, to David's question asking about that. But Peter, I think we forgot something.
We did.
Codification.
Do we have historic?
Where's that money? Don't we
Historic
have to pay one more time?
No.
Or we're all done?
This is, yeah.
I think I must ask you.
It's in FY19. It's budgeted in FY19, the last payment.
Okay.
What was
We'll
Never
double,
mind
triple
that.
check. The codification project, so we engaged General Code a couple years ago now, to do
Oh,
a
yeah.
full, review, and rewrite of our general bylaws and zoning bylaws, to, check for consistency with state statute, duplication, general organization, and so we've been going through that process over the past couple of years.
So we had it budgeted out over so many years, and
Several
we've encumbered different times, but for some reason, I thought I didn't put it in, but I think it's already there.
I think it says there in
Supposedly this
19.
year, and if we don't use it, I encumber it again.
Right,
Never mind that.
What,
we'll double check.
what is in the
Question.
vault? It's a lot of documents.
All of our,
paper.
permanent documents.
And are you monitoring someone, the humidity level?
I did, I bought a,
Humidistat,
yes,
yeah.
an inexpensive one. I might
Yeah.
want to get a better one. We've been working hard on getting everything in archival preservation sleeves or in caps and closures. So all of those are done, the books are, everything's in good shape.
Hydrometer.
The ballots and stuff that have to wait in there sometimes got a little soggy this year, but
That turns it on and off. Yeah. Well. Gentlemen's, sorry.
talking about your own dehumidifiers back there.
Yeah, actually, to bring that up, we were looking at a dehumidifier for our lower level,
Mhm.
and it was more than 8,000. And as a stopgap measure, I bought one from Home Depot
Mhm.
and bought we're debating if it's hydrometer or humidistat. But anyway,
It's hydrometer.
Oh.
Terry looked that up.
darn it.
Thank you.
You win. I owe you $5. Anyway, it was remarkable how it fixed our humidity levels is a stopgap.
So is it in a window?
No, it's a unit, so we can drain ours into a drain, but you can
You have
also
to
just
drain it,
empty
yeah.
the bucket.
And that's what
So
we got.
that's what I got. So I
Oh,
have,
you do,
I
you
have
do.
2 of those, one up here
Okay,
and one
okay.
downstairs.
But that's,
It's a pain.
yeah,
It takes up
Not ideal.
space, and I need
It
the
is a
space.
pain.
And it is
completely
kind of a
agree.
pain.
I just, in case a stopgap measure was needed, which it is,
Yes.
you've already covered
Yeah.
it, I just was shocked
So
at
this-
how well it worked.
The expense of this one really is that it goes in the wall somehow and then has to drain out to
Yes.
over there.
Much easier
So
than
it would
hauling
need,
buckets.
and it would need, commercial grade,
Yeah.
something in
Yeah.
there. So this is the price that we got.
It's a split unit. It's like a Mr. Slim,
It's a-
right?
Yeah.
So
Mr. Slim.
I think that's what they cost.
It is, yeah.
Can this be under the category of historic building preservation for all the artifacts that are down there?
Very good.
CPC.
I don't know if CPC would pay for that. I can look
mean, it
into it.
seems
Because
right
I
in their
asked-
wheelhouse.
I was thought about, I've done so much work preserving everything, and I've had people come in and there's better ways that, you know, we could take out the shelving and the stuff I have in there and put better type furniture, it's not furniture, but
Yeah, so
shelving.
It's all humidity, though.
separate issue entirely, but CPC did vote last week to extend their deadline.
For
this
submissions.
year.
Yeah, February
So,
11th.
to accept applications. to
Have we
February-
considered that before, or am I way off the mark in terms of,
We haven't had that conversation.
I didn't, for some reason, I didn't think they could. I could look into that.
I mean, it's all the
That's not a
history of
bad
the,
idea.
in the,
It is.
a lot of things important to the history of the town are there, I imagine,
Sounds like it's
never
worth a
having been
try.
there.
Not a try, it sounds like it's worth.
We could have that
Okay.
discussion.
All right. I'll work on that tomorrow.
Another few $1,000
Right.
we're eking along.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Everything
Well,
counts.
Everything counts. Pennies
I mean,
count
it's-
right now.
We have to preserve the documents. I mean, there's
Yeah,
no-
yeah.
Right.
We have to preserve it.
376th
Agreed,
anniversary
I would
party.
think so.
Yeah, for the 376th. 375th. We did a great, we've been preserving it for a long time. But I think, any other questions you guys have from me? I think we were talking when we did the codification that we can change our fees. Like I could change the fees in the town clerk's office.
Yep.
I looked at that. I don't know. I don't want to,
You're always pleasant, always smiling, so it's.
not always, but thank you. So that's something if you told me to do, I would look to do, but if not,
Like the CPC is,
but I will
Well,
do the
yeah, we can look
CPC.
into
I
that
didn't,
anyway.
I didn't think
I think
about
it's
that.
part-
Yeah, we'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Good idea. Awesome.
All right.
Is that it for me?
Thank you very much.
And thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Please, Diane.
Okay.
I'd be interested to see what,
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that, I mean, I just keep thinking, like, should we lease out space to the museum for the vault? Like, I don't know, what's going on with this vault? I suppose I should see it someday before
Isn't it right
Definitely
here?
no,
it's not that impressive.
well, no capacity for leasing out.
Build a bigger vault. All right.
Miscellaneous?
Miscellaneous, yeah, so I had,
So this-
FinCom liaison says a miscellaneous, is that on
No,
there?
no, no,
Or
not
Oh,
yet.
you're there.
Miscellaneous
Miscellaneous
is-
departments, oh, right,
Yeah,
sorry.
So,
My bad.
yeah,
What number?
no number. It's right after the full roll-up, the revenue expense totals we have under
Upfront.
miscellaneous departments upfront before the town administration.
Miscellaneous departments.
So,
selectmen, town administrator, town hall.
You got it.
Got it.
yep.
May I look?
So, Selectmen is just going up a couple $100 for the 2% COLA, and then there's a shift in the expense lines. The Selectmen's expenses at $2,000 a year, that number is rarely spent down, really isn't much needed there, so we're shifting that line technically from the Selectmen over to the town administrator expense line. So that's the difference in both of those expense lines. Town administrator line reflects 2% COLA and the maximum 2% merit, in line with all the other non-union employees. Town hall is set to go up a little over $11,000, and that's for 2% COLA and the max 2% merit for the full-time executive assistant, and then at the half-time special project manager, so that's 1.5 FTEs on those two figures, and then an increase in the minutes secretary position to match the meeting actuals that we've had over the past few fiscal years. And then the merit pay pool is also in the town hall personnel line, and so that's the 2% max for FY20 merit, and whatever isn't paid out at the end of the performance evaluation process then falls out to free cash the following year, but we have to fund at the maximum amount. So those are the increases there. IT, the major driver there, it's an increase of a little over $9,000. So have, in the past few months, gone through a solicitation process. And the net result of that is an incremental increase in our IT support costs, but the big driver is backup and disaster recovery. I think a pretty significant liability, frankly, that we don't currently have in place now. It's budgeted at $700 a month on a go-forward basis, and we've gotten 2 quotes from that came in right on the same number, so I feel like that's a good number. That's one of those, at this point, value added outside of level services budget, so.
Do we have multi-factor? So when you enter our system, is it just password protected, or do you have a code or anything? It's just your password?
Yep.
Okay. We might want to start asking about that.
Yeah, and, actually this afternoon, had a meeting with a number of other area managers on the North Shore talking about regional IT. We're all in pretty similar places. Some of us sub it out, we do to varying degrees. Nobody really has a lot of in-house staff who have specialized knowledge in IT. The generalists doing it and trusting consultants to keep us going. Danvers is the one exception to that rule, and they're looking to build out a kind of regional model where they could provide, kind of a tiered level of services. So just like a basic customer support, some infrastructure that they have some capacity to build out. So we're talking about putting in a grant application through the efficiency and regionalization program that the state has now to look at our collective needs and what that model would look like and everything. And I think that's probably big picture, might make a lot of sense. But still a couple of years out, in the meantime, we're going to continue on. I think that being the case, kind of regardless of where we end up with it. On the support side, I feel like we really should try to add this element for next year, if we can.
Just a quick question. What constitutes disaster recovery? Is that a major breach, or is that literally a physical disaster and everything goes down?
So it's anything and everything. It's really a break in the systems, and I'd be happy to provide. I think
It's my day job in
That's your
insurance.
day
Yeah,
job.
so it's a hack. So if
A major breach into the
it
system?
doesn't have to be major. It could be just a ransomware attack. So someone
Oh.
clicks on something, freezes the network,
Yeah.
right? They can't access anything,
Yeah.
so they consider that disaster. They have to go back, if they have to go back to the next day prior, get the systems all back. Hopefully they mirror it every day, how often it's backed up. So if we don't have the right backups, there's been businesses or small towns who've just been
They
wiped.
lost
They
everything?
lost everything.
Wow.
So Atlanta was a big example how that city was shut down for a little bit.
Which
because of
one?
what happened.
Atlanta.
Atlanta, the
Yeah.
whole city of
Yeah,
Atlanta?
so, I obviously, I may be abstaining or whatever, but I would, it's something we need to do. If we lose everything, then we're in trouble.
It's, we're all so dependent on that every second of every
Yep.
day. It's essential to every department, what every department is doing on a daily basis. So I think the more,
So that 8,400 doesn't cover, it's not like an insurance policy to pay, and this is like the ransomware.
no.
It's just to correct, try to correct
It's to be able to go
everything.
back, it's to ensure that mirroring's been done and replication, so you can spin up virtual servers to replicate the infrastructure that you have while you're trying to deal with the breach, but
Yeah.
also be able to press the reset button and then go back however, most recently, longest a day, that everything's been mirrored
Mhm.
in the system, so that you don't lose too much.
It's like
we have
saving your
insurance?
Word file.
What?
It's like saving your Word file.
We do, okay.
So to David's question, we do now have insurance. That's a new ad this year. Our insurance carrier offered it for the first time. That's something that was identified last year as a need. And this year we're getting it for free from Haya. I don't think that's gonna be the case going forward. I don't know.
And next year.
First year is free. But, they recognize, I think, they had a lot of customers who were going to them saying, we see this as a need, and they were pointing them elsewhere. And then they said, wait a minute, we probably should have the ability to deliver this in-house, and so that's what they're doing this year. So, we do now have cyber
Good.
coverage. Town council is set to increase $5,000, and again, that's our legal line. That's budgeted, I think, at $55,000 for FY19. And the proposal is to go up to $60,000 for '20. That is based on both the past couple of year actuals, where we've come in around 65 or so. So not that, it's not like we've required these major reserve fund transfers or year-end transfers to balance legal. But we do have some outstanding land use litigation in particular that's still swirling out there that, we're gonna be obligated to be involved in going forward. So that's the increase there. The reserve fund is level funded at the $125,000 amount that we shifted down to a couple years ago now. And, obviously in FY17 we had Hiltz going bankrupt and having to go out for that new solicitation for our new hauler. And so we saw the major increase there. But we're locked into a 10-year contract with that provider.
It hasn't changed due to the non-recycling or
So
China?
we'll get to that piece.
Okay.
But, in terms of reserve fund, we've been pretty good on it the past couple of years. End of last year, we were able to provide funding to chip away at the tree removal, tree planting needs, and so forth.
Oh, I got my notes. I have it from your recycling. Thank you.
On the audit, our contract with Powers & Sullivan, which is our audit firm, expires in FY19, so we've just got an incremental increase. We've been locked into, that was a 3-year contract. So we've got an increase of $1,500 there to, I think, $23,000 a year. Street lighting, there's an increase of $2,000.
Let me guess.
What's that?
Let me guess.
What's that?
You go to great extremes to be more efficient, to save money, and the rates go up.
No.
No.
So,
Wow.
no, I think this was a case where we were spending on the order of about $55,000 a year on streetlights before we did the LED conversion with
Yeah.
the Green Communities funding. Then, the year after, we were kind of in midstream and said, let's be conservative. I think we might have budgeted $35,000 or $40,000. And then came in at the end of the year and said, oh no, we can probably drop that down a little more. So over the past several years, we went from 55 down to, I think it's at $18,000 in FY19.
Okay.
And it's more, we've kind of gotten to the point where we're saying, that's a little tight. We've got, every time they get called out, and they're not getting called out often, but every time they do, it's a couple $100. And so.
To Siemens?
To Siemens that we have under contract, yeah.
So where I wrote still saving 35K plus from change
Yeah.
from National Grid, that meant when they weren't prior to LED?
Prior to us, so there's a twofold savings. We purchased them from National Grid, so there's a different tier, different tariff rate.
Yep.
And then there's also a different tariff rate for conversion to LED. So we had a two-part savings.
Okay.
From that conversion, purchase and conversion.
Thanks.
And then on refuse, as you mentioned, there is, with the national stored policy, we're spending, something on the order of $4,000 or so a month for recycling disposal. That is new, before that with Hiltz, and the argument could be made, that's part of the reason why they went bankrupt, is the recycling market was good, it was a $0 contract, they generally saw revenues from that, then the market's changed. So it's a shared risk now under our contract with Casella. And we're paying about $80 to $85 a ton for recycling disposal. To contrast with our trash disposal cost with Wheeler Brader of like $62 a ton. So it's actually the way the market is now, particularly around paper. We're spending $20 or so more a ton to dispose of recycling. There's some, Patty and I were at the MMA, Mass Municipal Association, annual meeting this past weekend, went to a workshop there where there were representatives from the state and the industry, and they, sounds like there may be some hope on the horizon that we've seen them stabilize. There was a pretty dramatic increase over a number of months. But then they have stabilized over the past several months, maybe even 6 months at that level. And what's happening now is there is still a demand, particularly for paper in China, but they can't take the product in because the contamination threshold is so low in terms of acceptability. It's, I think, less than it's like 0.5%, where before they were accepting 5% contamination rates. So there's not the paper in the market in China, but there's still the need. And so several major, 3, I think, paper processing plants that were in the US that were shuttered because they couldn't compete with the China market with the paper, what they were paying for the paper product, are now being bought and cycled back up by the Chinese in the US to be able to deliver that product to their market and get around the national sword policy.
Buy new. If you can't use the old stuff, buy the new stuff.
Yeah.
It's like rigs coming back online if oil prices are high again, right?
Yeah. So we think that those are going to be online in relatively short order in the next year, and that will then drive down those costs. So we'll see some relief in terms of our disposal costs. And then the other, I think, important part that was brought up at the conference was the whole concept of, well, if paper contamination is our issue that's really driving this, we went to single stream because that worked at the time. Why don't we go back to dual stream? And basically the message back was the horse has left the barn on that. It's not gonna, the way all of the collection is set up in terms of the trucks themselves and the processing plants, unless they're dual stream now, they're not going to go back from dual stream or single stream to dual stream. It's just too much sunk costs to be able to warrant it. So they're hoping to basically weather out this storm, really push education and enforcement, and try to deal with it that way. That said, it's hard to, big picture, think that all of the municipalities whose recycling materials are going to, this one regional processing plant down in Charlestown are all going to educate and enforce to the point where we actually drop our contamination levels down so that we can sell it to the market. So it's all certainly well-intended and good, but I don't know big picture that that's going to help save us costs. So DEP is doing what they can to work with municipalities, and we've certainly been in touch with Casella. And you'd think that we would, because Casella is both our hauler and handling disposal, see the lowest rates possible.
So what's happening to the paper that's not meeting the acceptable contamination rates? Is it being sold elsewhere?
It's
Is
being
it being
sold,
thrown out?
it's being sold elsewhere.
Thailand, I
With
think.
less
Exactly.
demand?
Vietnam.
Yep.
I think.
Less demand, exactly,
Yeah.
Southeast Asia.
And contamination constitutes water contamination, food?
It's
food?
like the greasy pizza box. Think of it that way. I mean, they showed images of, all of the various things that they see that people put in the
Ew.
recycling bins.
I'm sure they had some interesting slides.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
entertainment portion.
Fascinating, yeah, good to have right after lunch.
60 Minutes did something on it a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and this is we are,
Everybody's feeling this.
everybody's dealing, we are
Yeah.
not remotely unique in this, and everybody's feeling the impact of it, and I think, order of magnitude, it certainly impacts us, but you think of the larger cities and what that percentage change translates to in terms of dollars. And
It's huge.
So I know I'm getting into the weeds on this, but you either need to improve how it goes into the stream and it's not contaminated, or is there a way to process it so there's less contamination?
So they can't, I actually went down to the processing plant down in Charlestown, and the conversations I had with them is they said the cost of, they'd have to re-engineer their entire plant. And so you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, and with the major question mark of what's going to be the long-term value
Yeah.
of what's a commodity that's changing all the time in
Right.
the markets.
So dollar impact recycling went from nothing to 25 grand a year. That's what I have written down.
Yep.
Is that still about right?
Yeah, I think
And it's probably only going up,
yeah, I
at
think
least
it actually
until it stabilizes.
maybe more like $35,000 a year.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the past several month actuals, but I think that's
And our
generally.
annual spend to Casella is, what do we pay him a year for that 10-year contract? Or does it
So I,
variable based on,
350
Yeah, I know.
or something?
Yeah. Several hundred thousand.
350,
Yeah.
360?
I have to sneak a peek.
no worries.
325.
Okay, thanks. And it was like 180 or
Nice
something
memory.
previously? Yeah, good memory. It was way the hell lower with Casella.
You got it.
Was it like 180 grand or something like that?
Yep, exactly.
All right. Between us, we'll remember the trash cost, I guess.
The what?
We'll remember the trash fees
Trash,
between
that's
us.
right.
And there,
We won't talk trash, though.
there's definitely some conversations. I meet with the other North Shore managers on a monthly basis, and this is a major driver for all of us.
Yeah.
And so we're actually having a session next week with Sharon Kashida, who's the head of DEP for our region, to kind of look at where we all are in terms of how we structure collection, what we're paying, who our providers are, when our contracts are up, to see if there's any economy of scale, any ability to work together to contain those costs, reduce those costs, and so forth. So we recognize that, it's something that if we can get at by working together, there's interest in doing so. I don't know what that would look like, but.
Okay.
And going back, the next one,
I know, I have more, but I'm gonna stop.
okay, on trash.
Yeah, on trash talk, yeah.
Retirement, right now, we don't have the final numbers from Essex County Regional Retirement, so what we've budgeted is a 9% increase, and that's based on their pension schedule, and also our experience and actuals over the past few fiscal years. So we'll know soon, I think in the next couple weeks, what that actual number is, but right now it's a plug, and it's a $65,000 increase.
And 9% is comparable to other increases in prior years?
Yes, exactly. Yep, so we looked at our prior year actuals. I think at minimum, it's set to increase by 7.5%.
Yeah, I have a 9% plug, 7.5 increase.
Yeah,
on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
7.5 is what is the minimum increase that we would see.
Notes work.
And Then general insurance, right now, this is again, for all of our property and liability. And that's a 3% projected premium increase, plus some incremental coverage increases on a couple different areas where we've been, again,
Little light.
cranking down to make it work and
Yeah.
realize that we're just barely, I mean, we're, you know, on a $125,000 budget, we're looking at, you know, $400 or $500 in terms of capacity and some things that pop up along the way in terms of adding vehicles and so forth, and just make sure we've got a little headroom.
Yeah, right.
And then, the last, under miscellaneous, is the interfund transfer out, which is OPEB. So we, had to add that back into the budget for FY19. We had funded a $30,000 amount with one-time funds for 18, so, went to $40,000 for this year. We're looking to increase it to $50,000, and that's again in line with the policy that we adopted a year and a half or so ago to, you know, try to satisfy the bond rating agencies by adopting a policy. We had some analysis done, and we're just looking to chip away at it, $10,000 a year increase. So incremental, what they said was have a policy, stick to it. And so that's really what we're doing here. We're not fundamentally impacting our overall unfunded liability.
I have some background questions about OPEB. So before OPEB, was it just unfunded needs that weren't being funded, or is it because, and so we're trying to meet a need that wasn't being funded, or is it because the population and the needs are increasing?
No, it's because this was something that was never on the books until, is this fiscal year the first year, Patty? I think in FY19, or was it in 18, in our 18 audit. Regardless, it was GASB 7475, I think.
I think it was the 18 audit.
Yeah, I think it was the 18 audit. That,
Just a projection that the needs won't be met.
yeah, to acknowledge the liabilities and to actually reflect them on our audit statement. Because they are out there, they are obligations that we will, we are incurring and we'll have to cover at some point.
But why was there such a widespread, is OPEB just Massachusetts?
No, so
No,
this is
it's-
national.
Yeah.
So why was there such a widespread lack of accounting for that liability and underestimation?
Because you could kick that, you could ignore it and continue to increase the liability.
And you could
And it's
say,
an unfunded mandate.
we're a municipality, we're never gonna go away.
Never gonna run out of our ability to
We'll find
tax.
a way to, we have taxing authority,
Right.
so we'll find a way to fund it. That was the mentality up until the past couple of years.
Right, until the municipality goes bankrupt, and then there's talk of entitlement reform, and that
And I
either
think-
goes somewhere or it doesn't.
Right, and I think that was, there were a couple specific
Right.
incidents that occurred. And everybody said, whoa, this is something we can't
Third rail.
ignore anymore.
Yeah,
So we have to at least reflect it on the financials.
What benefits are exactly included in OPEB?
It's health insurance.
Health insurance, all health
It's
insurance.
retiree health insurance.
Retiree health insurance, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's shorthand.
Yeah. So what happens if there is fundamental reform in health insurance? What happens to all the OPEB money?
So for the good, you mean.
Yeah, it just depends which side.
What kind of reform? It depends on what it looks like. It could increase or decrease our liability. And I think that's where, we have a funding plan in place. The major part of it is that once our pension obligations are fully funded in 2006 or 36 or 37, that then we would slide, once that drops off, we would then supplement that and significantly increase our payments
To OPEB.
to OPEB. And then, out on the horizon by the mid 40s, we would have hypothetically paid down our obligation, and then we would just be maintaining funding on a
account.
go-forward basis. You'd want to maintain that.
So, similar in theory to the school's plan
Right,
for
Yep.
fully funded by
And similar
2050.
in theory to the pension plan.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is the pension, they keep pushing that out. And so it's always, you know, once it creeps up to 15 years, then they push it out again.
Mhm.
It's another 25 years out. So it's something that, you know, there's a real philosophical difference that some folks have with the extent to which it should be funded. And I think that's where there is general agreement. It's that you have a policy, you provide some incremental increase in funding year over year, and you adhere to it, the policy. And if you do nothing else, you know, that's gonna hopefully, at least at this point, satisfy the bond rating agencies, because they're looking, you know, across at what other municipalities are doing. And we're in a pretty good position on it, you know, in terms of the fact that we created ours relatively early on, not that there's a lot in, you know, our balance, and not that that's really doing much in reducing our liability. But there are plenty of municipalities that are just kind of getting around to it. There are also others, a small handful, who fully funded their OPEB liability, because they're in a different financial situation than we are.
Okay, thank you.
And then health insurance?
Oh, health insurance.
Yeah.
So that is also in here. It's actually kind of towards the end. There's a couple of spreadsheets that I when I pulled
Are
together.
they in the color coded or the main?
No, in the main booklet from the original meeting. So at the very, I think it's the last couple of pages of the miscellaneous tab.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like this.
Thank you.
Got it,
Yep.
thank you.
So basically, just in a nutshell, the health benefits were projecting to go up about $176,000 year to year. The way I built this budget is I went through and I basically started from the absolute beginning and looked at what we had on now, some of the shifts that we knew were gonna happen next year. We put in I believe it was an 8% escalation, just because we just don't know at this point what the escalation is gonna be on our health insurance. It fluctuates from year to year, as you know. And so when I looked at that number, I thought, wow, that's a really big increase year to year. So I went back and I looked at 19 and let the town administrator know that I think that we may have a shortfall in 19. I'm still trying to look at that. We're still catching up from the months of no one in the finance office, just keeping up with the accounting stuff, but we're doing fine. And but I'm looking at about a $68,000 deficit.
FY19 budget versus
FY19.
actual,
Yeah.
which we don't, of course, know yet.
Yeah, so there were
But the way our
some-
run rate is,
Yeah, there was some projections made at the time in terms of where folks would end up and what plan they'd end up. That didn't end up playing out the way that we had thought. When we transitioned, if you remember, that up until this year, we were in the GIC, so there were a whole host of plans that employees could participate in. And obviously, when we opted out, when we went with Harvard Pilgrim, the range of options shrunk considerably. And at the time, we worked with our consultant that does this with a lot of other municipalities, and they said, this is where we think they're gonna slot in. And they slotted in a little different, so that's one of the drivers. That's maybe a third or so of
Yeah,
the
we had a lot of
cost.
people who opted for the richest plan, which
Sure.
obviously is the most expensive for the town as well.
right?
So we're hoping to do some better education as part of the, renewal process
Was
this year.
GIC savings like 50,000?
No,
80?
it was actually 100,000.
Okay.
So it was pretty significant, but again, that was premised not just on a reduction in the
It
premiums.
was 50 and 50.
But on where people would end up with what plan. And so those were the projections that ended up being a little off.
And your
And we-
shortfall that you thought was in the, you
70.
identified a shortfall of 70?
About, yeah, a little under $70,000.
And then the other thing is just with the cycle of new staff coming online, folks who left
Mhm.
weren't taking health
Right.
insurance.
Right.
And new hires, just the way it's fallen out,
Yeah.
new hires have taken health insurance. So that's, you know, I think that's ballpark $18,000 if they take up the, you know, the expensive family plan in cost for every employee that takes a new plan. So
Right.
that adds up really quick.
It doesn't take a lot of people to add to that number.
What percentage of town employees are on town health plans versus not?
Of our full-time,
Yeah.
I want to say we've got about 54 full-time employees and 39 take health insurance, so about 2/3. And we do have an opt-out incentive program for employees if they don't take insurance. So that's something that the town had tried to do to try to get people to shift out. If they, you know, if they had a spouse that they could take their plan and it was somewhat comparable, to try to shift that cost out, but. And we can double check.
No, it's fine, I was just ballpark, I was curious.
Patty, when you started, I think you mentioned around 176,000
Yep.
was an increase. Where can I find that?
You know what, the budget number from 19 is actually not on here. It's
Okay.
638,415.
638, 415.
Yep.
Going to 814.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Page from that.
And the one note there that's important is that about $22,000 of that, just over $22,000 of that, is for sick leave buyback for 2 library employees who are retiring, one who's retired and one who's retiring this spring. So that is half of the town's total obligations to them. So between the two, we owe $45,000 in sick leave buyback. They have agreed, really just voluntarily agreed
Split it up.
to split it up between FY '19 and '20. So half the obligations in '20, and we're gonna be having a conversation about the need for an RFT to fund the other half out of '19. The good news, big picture, is that they're both library employees. Hamilton, you know, pays about 2/3 of those total costs. So the net cost to the town of that $45,000 is about $15,000. So, you know, and that payment will be handled as part of our reconciliation process.
And is sick leave buyback part of contract?
So,
Because when I was a
One-
government employee and left, I didn't get sick leave buyback. I'm just curious where it comes from.
yeah, so I'll say generally with the new hires, department head hires, this board has gotten away from sick leave buyback. But there are legacy hires, town employees who either have it in their contract or there is language in the employee handbook. It caps it at a certain number, but, you know, for one of these employees, they worked for the library for 38 years, so there's
Oh, yeah, a lot of sick leave.
a lot of, well, yeah, and even though it is capped, it's, you know, a reflection of all of the time spent.
Coming to work.
So that is another, you know, that's $22,000 of that increase, the $138,000 increase. I'm sorry, what was it, $138,000? $176,000 increase, so $22,000 of that, most of which 2/3 of which will be paid by Hamilton.
And it falls under healthcare.
Yeah,
Why not? I mean,
and we've talked about,
could go somewhere else, but what does it matter?
yeah, that's probably the best place to put it. We have talked about creating a separate account to cover those costs. We've got some retirements on the horizon that we, have a pretty good sense when those are gonna happen, and those are gonna be, again, pretty significant. So the idea would be, obviously not next year, but in the next, for 21, 22, maybe continuing to fund it at that level of $25,000 or thereabouts, so that when we do come to the point where those retirements are coming online, there's not the wild swing. We're not trying to accommodate a, $80,000, for a couple employees
Right.
cost. And I'm not sure if that's gonna stay on the list of warrant articles with the board, just because they're trying to be sensitive to not having 30-plus articles
Yeah.
and losing quorum and so forth.
Right,
There's
and
a
it's
lot-
small
lot
in the
in the
grand
mix.
scheme of things,
Yeah.
despite it being
Yep.
real money, and you're keeping tabs on what the liability is at present across the employees in the
Yeah,
town.
and the other thing I should note is that in all the union contracts, the last iteration of negotiations, we added in language with fire and police, I think all three, that basically said that the employees had to give the town notice by December 1 of the previous fiscal year so that we could include it in the budget.
Right.
We would make all best efforts to pay it if you didn't notify us, but we couldn't guarantee it in that fiscal year. If we don't, it's not in the budget, and it's not enough in the reserve fund. We wouldn't have anywhere else to go for it. So that's in there now.
And, a lot of jumping around here from lane to lane, but that's because of the change from GIC to Tufts? No,
Harvard Building.
Harvard Pilgrim.
Yeah, and we, now that we're out of the GIC, will go through an annual solicitation process. The Public Employee Committee, the PEC, has to be involved in that process. That's a representative from police, AFSCME, and the retirees. Technically, those are the three voting entities within the PEC. But this last time through, we had non-union representatives and it's sitting at the table, although it doesn't necessarily have any statutory authority, just to have, involvement in the process and just kind of somebody else to ask questions and everything. So we'll be doing that in the next few months, and we do work with NFP, which is the broker we worked with when we opted out of the GIC. And again, they work with a lot of municipalities acting in that capacity. So we don't have to navigate it alone.
Okay.
That's all we've got for miscellaneous.
For miscellaneous.
administration. Yep.
Okay. Back in the binder. Not get lost.
So where do you want in these purple, or this color coded?
I want the color one back.
Okay.
'Cause I
What, can we
was gonna
take stuff out of it?
take everything out of it, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Want the folder?
I just want the folder, I don't want the stuff.
Got it, all right. I'm just making sure. It keeps me,
Track of who
15
has what.
cents each.
yeah, I know.
Alex, did you guys talk about leaf pickup December 1st, or whatever the first weekend in December was?
No, I don't, when we were guests of the BOS, we did not talk about leaf pickup options.
Nope, so that's something,
Should we talk about that later?
yeah, I
That's
think,
under DPW?
within the DPW
Yeah.
context. So next Thursday.
Okay.
Okay.
Because frankly, that would be the one area where we'd be going in the other direction, actually saving some money.
Yep.
But it involves something that's
Near and
not
dear.
easy to get
Yes.
through,
Near and dear.
knowing the history.
Yep.
But I think at this point, worth having the conversation,
Yeah.
especially as stormwater comes online in particular.
Yeah, as a
As for-
preview of my questions, this is the 5 or 6 different places I lived. and paid a lot of taxes, this is the first place I've ever had leaf pickup service.
And we get to poke fun at Hamilton neighbors who have to
It's-
bag all their stupid leaves. I've done that for years. Oh, you bagged 85 bags last weekend?
Had a good time.
I have a massive backpack blower, and I just blow them over the wall.
Right, and the counter,
Like eating
the counter is to say, yes, it's a cost, but,
It's a cost.
you know, we've got one of the higher tax rates, and this is
Yeah,
a
I just don't know what like
service
sunk costs
Yes,
there
of
are
course.
in the,
Yep.
all that, so that's for another day.
that- Yeah, and Bill's, should have all the backup materials that Bill's provided at this point in terms of, the impacts on staffing and expenses, and so forth.
All right, so we made it through the first round of departments that we covered. We're good for those for this evening. I asked Patty to include FinCom liaisons on the agenda, which we need to
Wanna pass along your folder?
reinstate.
Patty's staring at you.
I wanted to have, I didn't provide to Patty, but I wanted to, just a short memo, and I'll follow up with it afterwards, and it can be an artifact of the meeting or whatever, but just to formalize our liaison approach. So going back to, in years past, FinCom, of course, had liaisons to all the departments, which it's the only way to do it, it only makes sense. We didn't do it last year. We had a lot of new members to the Finance Committee. That doesn't mean we couldn't have done it. Perhaps we should have done it, but we were learning about how the budget works, how the process works. Municipal Finance 101. Everyone got up to speed very quickly and made a huge contribution and a really, really great impact to the process and to the town. And now we know what we're up against. We made it through last year. We had the override to contend with. We're up against very similar, if not worse, or slightly different challenges this year. So we'll reinstitute the liaisons to the department. So Mike will work with Public Safety, as you did previously, I believe, right? In prior years? No? Okay, what was your request? I thought you had partnered with them, but it's a natural fit anyway with your background in
Yep, okay.
law enforcement and
Sure,
military
yep,
and
yep,
everything,
yep,
so
yep,
that's
okay,
great.
Yep.
Carrie will join me in liaising with the schools. Historically, and I think it's appropriate that the chair works directly with the schools, and I think where it's such a big part of our budget, and given Carrie's great work in evaluating the particulars in the budget and really getting a really keen understanding of it and asking, great questions of the administration and the school committee, I think that's gonna be a great value add.
Great.
So thank you for doing so. David, on the town side, will liaise with Town Hall and the related departments. I struggle to kind of do that, justice in describing all of the related departments, because it's not just the Town Hall administration of, that are run by Peter and by Patty, but myriad other departments, permitting, inspectional services, town clerk, and all others. And with your experience with the technical savvy that you have on things like IT, I think that'll go a long way. And then Jim can liaise with the joint departments. Our partnership with the town of Hamilton, with the important library, joint rec programs, smaller items like, newer items like the inspectional services, which has been hugely successful, and smaller things like Pleasant Pond and any new opportunities that come up. And that's really important because we're always looking for cost savings and partnering with Hamilton where appropriate. And it may or may not lead to, much larger discussions, things like joint firehouse that have come along and, come and gone or whatever, been put on pause, but.
You can talk regional dispatch.
Regional
dispatch.
Regional
Well,
dispatch, yeah.
We're about to have
Next
a
time.
delivery of
Or-
a feasibility
and-
study, looking at our options relative to either joining Danvers or Hamilton, that was commissioned early fall. And then we're in the midst of having a discussion with the state, and the sheriff's office about, what the state 911, takeover of the dispatch center up at Middleton looks like. And great that we're not gonna pay anything, but how does that all work? And how does the town and the board and the departments that are directly impacted kind of feel about what our best options are, not just looking at costs, but service levels, staffing, operationally, everything, so,
So you'll give me a heads up when those meetings are.
yes, indeed. Coming soon. I expect in the next month.
Cool. So we have, should we take a quick look at the calendar for our upcoming meetings? We had one rescheduled for the 11th of February.
Does that work for everybody? I've heard
I
from a
think-
few of you.
I
Just-
think I saw everyone.
Okay, perfect. I
Yeah.
didn't see, all right, so instead of the 13th, we'll meet on the 11th.
Okay.
So I'll update this and send it out again.
I even think the 13th on there. Oh, but that, yeah. that
It's on
is
the,
correct.
this is the
Yep.
one, it's on the.
Sorry, I'm sorry, you go beyond the 6th?
I know, I'm looking at the main, the giant schedule.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
my apologies.
So this is the 13th.
That's the guy.
CPC is now gonna meet on the 13th, so we're making sure that FinCom and CPC are on the same night, so both can be televised and attended by anyone who's interested, 'cause it's gonna be a big CPC meeting. we
Right,
expect.
right, okay.
All right, so I will get that going.
So we're up next Wednesday and Thursday, 30th and 31st.
Yes.
So another action-packed week.
Just a reminder that Thursday will be at Bucher.
At Bucher, thank you, that's right.
Mm.
Planning board beat us to it here, right?
They,
someone else is here?
Yeah,
Correct, planning board.
we were originally here, and then we moved, because the planning board was here, and then
Okay.
something with the Bucher.
Thank you for getting
Musical
us out
chairs
of
this
the
time
room.
of year.
That's
No, I
fine.
appreciate it.
Totally fine.
And of course, you know, we doubled up last year, 1 week anyway, and we'll do so. We'll get through departments and we'll get it done. And then, of course, we'll re-engage with Board of Selectmen. At some point, I think we're looking at, Catherine and I were talking, we might aim for right before school vacation week of February 20th, if possible. Of course, we'll figure out that schedule and when the right time is, pending everyone's understanding and being on the same page as to where we're at with
This school
town and schools. Well, that school vacation week, we were thinking maybe if we could possibly meet before school vacation week,
Oh, okay.
before the week of the 20th.
Do you typically not
I
meet
mean-
school vacation week? or-
I think that's,
Well, there's, I think, some
It's
folks who
conceivable.
aren't necessarily gonna be in town that
Gotcha.
week,
Okay.
Right,
so,
right.
yeah, I mean, if it was gonna be that week, our really only option is the 14th, because the selectmen are meeting on the, you're meeting on the 11th, selectmen are meeting on the 12th, CPC is on the 13th, and that's gonna be, one that we don't wanna double book on, and then you got Thursday the 14th, so,
Would be the,
any Valentine's
The
Day
regroup.
plans. I think, were we here Valentine's Day last year, or am I making?
Yeah,
that
I
up?
don't know, that might be tough for,
Think you did.
you did, yes, thank you, thank you.
We're just trying to get chocolate again, I guess.
I think I told you I won't be here on the 6th.
Yes, you did, yep.
Definitely go
So
for
the 11th meeting is a regular FinCom meeting at
Yes,
6:30
yeah, that'll be instead of the 13th.
here.
That should be here, yeah.
And that's kind of reset on the budget. Where are we now? We've gone through the departments, we've met with Hamilton on the joint program, we've met with the schools. Where does that leave us relative to, big
Right.
picture, what we
Yep.
wanna be doing?
On the school side, we attended their hearing. We were all there for that. I think it was important for us to understand where they're at. And of course, there haven't been any changes since their, as you mentioned earlier, since their preliminary recommendation by the administration that we know of, right?
Yeah, there's been some conversation with Hamilton about backing out the school resource officer
Correct.
out of the school budget, and Hamilton taking up those costs
Right.
for FY '20. Ultimately, Hamilton will use
Impact fee.
funds from the impact fee from the host community agreement for the new marijuana establishment. that's,
We have precedent for engaging with Hamilton with an IMA for shared resources. If we were to ever be in a position to pay for a portion of that, or even not, right, directly with Hamilton rather than have it be on the school's books.
Yeah, so, and that's, I think something that
Theoretically.
came up at that school meeting about, peeling out school costs and the town paying for that separately and setting that precedent. I see it as it's an employee of the town of Hamilton. There.
Agreed.
And so I don't really worry that much about
Okay.
that. One of the school committee members just sent the Hamilton town manager and I, the state recognizing that this issue, you know, SROs generally is kind of front and center
Right.
statewide. The state worked on developing kind of a model intermunicipal agreement around SROs.
Okay.
And so we just got that maybe a day or so ago. So I've started to take a look at that. And I think there may be some consideration for Wenham being involved and having a voice in what that program looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, TBD over the
Yeah.
next month or so.
Okay. I think we received that as well. I think I did and may have forwarded it, so, but I haven't
Okay.
looked at it in detail yet, so. Okay. All right, great.
One quick thing.
Yes.
Catherine was just telling me is that she thinks that the meeting next Thursday for the planning board is not going to happen here.
Oh, really?
So we might be able to have the meeting here next Thursday. I will look into that tomorrow.
Okay.
You know, for sure.
Yeah, I know they're gonna continue
Yeah,
that
they're gonna-
hearing,
yeah.
so maybe they don't need to have it here,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
We'll let
Thank
you know.
We'll let you know.
Yeah, great, great. Nice to be here if we can be.
If there's no one here, we'll go over to Bucher
I'll let you know
or
before.
join the meeting here.
Okay.
One last thing for the
Yes.
agenda for next week, I'll pull that together because I want to get that posted. Just put the departments in there for next week because we have quite a few.
I think so, yeah. We're getting into it.
We're getting to some meaty ones,
Yeah.
some ones that might take a little bit longer. So I'll send a draft to you like I normally would, and you can let me know if that looks good, and then
Okay.
I'll get it all posted.
And as always, if other members have
Yep.
agenda items they want, just send out an email.
Yes, sir.
Include Patty, of course.
Yeah, but this was we're not gonna have that high-level budget discussion every.
Yeah, I know, poor
Set
Eric
the
and.
context,
Sure.
But
Yeah,
then
damn it,
now
yeah.
it's time to kind of get rolling with the individual. departments.
Absolutely, but I think that was critical. We need to all understand exactly where we're at and have those rough numbers, an understanding of those as we start to meet with and think through and ask questions of the department heads.
So one other piece that I'd just
Yep.
add, that I shared out with the Board of Selectmen last night, one piece of good news, nice way to start this budget process, is that we got word just yesterday from the Government Finance Officers Association, national organization, that we were awarded the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for our FY19, this current fiscal year's budget. So that's been, you know, that's a very competitive program. They look at a whole host of metrics and really just, you know, represents best practices in terms of getting information out to residents in a format that is accessible and comprehensive and tells our story about what we're doing and where we're going. And so something we've been striving for really since I've gotten here, and have gotten the feedback we put in every year and gotten feedback and refined as, you know, as we could year over year, and worked with the department heads to get a little more information and all of that. So a nice accomplishment
Yeah.
for the team.
Congratulations. This is a
Yep.
big accomplishment.
Get a cash award? I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
Yeah, no, not
to
so
go.
much. We got a plaque. We'll have to put the plaque up.
Sorry, I just slipped
somewhere in
out.
Town hall. That's right.
No, that is great. Where will the plaque go? TBD.
Yeah, we will have to figure that's a.
All right, lots of departments
Exactly.
contributed. Usually
Major,
to that.
major executive decision there.
Right.
But, and I do want to specifically call out Jackie Bresnahan for doing
Sure.
yeoman's work on that, pulling it together and doing a lot of behind the scenes work to get it to where it is. And it's up on the website, and hopefully some folks will read it.
Yep.
You know, that's the goal.
Right.
And so, but just kind of reflective of broadly trying to, you know, be more transparent and share information out with residents.
That's what it's all about. Yep.
Speaking of sharing information and transparency, we had sort of talked earlier, but throwing it out there to consider if we want to or not want to have another budget forum.
Another budget what?
A budget forum that we did last year because of the
You mean a
circumstances.
public forum?
Yes,
Separate from the warrant hearing.
Good point.
yes,
Right, right.
just informational.
Well, with help from everybody, and
I don't know if it's worth it or if there's a demand for it.
I think that and any other options that people have on the table for along the lines of improving and, you know, increasing and improving communication, transparency. And I think that, especially looking at, you know, facing another override and potentially complicated warrant structure, even if it's the same as last year. I mean, I think there are probably some who unfortunately may not have understood exactly how that all worked, despite our best efforts to make it clear. So I think it's all, you know, that much more critical that we keep an open mind for the, in budget form, sure. If that's the right thing to do, I think we should talk about that. We didn't have huge attendance, but we can figure out, you know, I think we need to be in the press more, certainly in the media.
Yeah, true.
It's critical as well. You hand them it and they'll print it apparently, so we'll have to get some stuff to them.
There's, just quickly, there's two groups that I think will be competing, if you will. There's the parent group who will be at the town meeting, for example, to support the overrides. And as you look around the town meeting, probably 50%, maybe a little less, maybe a little bit more, are elderly folks. So how do we get the message out to these two diverse groups in our community that all of them are well-intentioned and want to support what they think that needs to happen in the community? But just generally, those, you know, there's a lot of people in between, but generally, when I think you sit at town meeting for years, you look around, and possibly we could have the school budget move forward into the article, in the Warren article, so that people don't get up and leave real quick.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and that was something we talked about in our debrief from last year's town meeting in terms
The
of
first town
trying.
meeting or the second town meeting?
Oh, when we had a.
Well, it was after the first and then again after the second.
Quorum,
But,
search in the
so,
field.
so the good news is that our quorum requirements are gonna be lower this year,
Yeah.
for good or for bad, I guess.
But come anyway.
That's right,
Yeah.
because it's not much, you're talking for annual town meeting, like 18 less residents, so not a big change, down to the 120 number. But definitely, there was a acknowledgement after last year of really needing to be strategic in terms of where we have certain articles, whether it's, you know, CPA, if that's got a lot of churn in one particular year, or the school operating override, or so forth. There's definitely worth having a conversation, and the board now has, I think, even more awareness of what makes the most sense to try to get people there and keep people there.
I'm just thinking of the, our population in the community is about 1/3 over 65, something like that. And getting that population to understand the budget.
Does a mailer work? With mail, a regular?
I don't know what would
mailer?
work necessarily, I'm just saying, these are groups maybe which think about targeting in a unique kind of way.
The COA has regular weekly programming.
They
I'm not
do.
sure what the
They
participation
have
rate is,
speakers and so
but
on.
that may be another option.
And, but so on the mailer idea, if you remember, we were concerned that we were not gonna get quorum for that second iteration of town meeting.
Right.
Last April, and so we actually did a mailer, hard copy mailer,
Did you?
to get out the vote.
Yeah.
And, the takeaway after last year was, well, let's do that again, and let's, do it this time, you know, well before
Annual town meeting.
the warrant hearing,
Yeah.
to alert them, here's the warrant hearing, here's town meeting,
Right.
here's a link to the, you know, annual report and the warrant book, so that folks can have a place to go if they're so inclined, besides delivery of hard copy. And one of the things that came up then is if we're gonna do a separate budget forum or something along those lines, that we include
Oh,
that,
yes.
and include that date, and, you know, look at all that information in that mailer and get the mailer out well enough in advance so that you can have all those. And that's, again, I think, worth having a discussion as we work our way through the budget process on what makes sense and when we're gonna do it and what it's gonna look like.
Right,
But,
right. Open to ideas, yeah.
but, yeah, I think we're definitely planning on doing, a mailer similar to what we did last year to try to educate and get out the vote a little bit.
Good.
Cause I think it's gonna do nothing but help, and it's relatively low cost.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Any other discussion?
Oh.
If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
All right, second? All right, all in favor? We're adjourned.